Hey guys, welcome back to today's video. Today is Wednesday, April 7th, 2021, and today we're going to be taking a look at an extensive list of potential hopefuls in the 2024 presidential election for the Republican Party. On your screen, we have a number of potential candidates that could be announcing their bids in the next few years, vying for the presidency against Joe Biden or Kamala Harris or another Democratic nominee in 2024, and I think it'll be very interesting just ranking these candidates and talking about some of the plus and minuses of some of these candidates themselves. Now, some of these I think are completely out of the ordinary. I think that we are not going to see candidates like Dan Crenshaw and Ivanka Trump announce their bid, at least maybe not for 2024, potentially in the future, but I don't think 2024 is really in consideration for any of them. I just want to go through each single one that's on this tier-making list now and just rank them as to how strong I think they would be for the GOP and what that would actually mean. And, looking at this list here, I'm going to go through each name so you can put names to faces here. So going from left to right, we start off with Ben Sasse, a senator from Nebraska. Charlie Baker, the governor of Massachusetts. All of these are Republicans, by the way, so if you hear a blue state, assume it's a Republican because it is. Chris Christie, former governor of New Jersey. Dan Crenshaw, representative from Texas's 2nd District. Donald Trump Jr. Eric Trump is right next to Donald Trump. We'll get there. Donald Trump, the former president of the United States. Eric Trump. Ron DeSantis, the governor of Florida. Greg Abbott, the governor of Texas. Ivanka Trump. I almost said Mitt Romney for a second. Sorry about that. Josh Hawley, senator from Missouri, newly elected. Larry Hogan, governor of Maryland. My governor. Mike Pence, the former vice president. Mike Pompeo. Former Trump admin official Mitt Romney, senator from Utah. Nikki Haley, former Trump admin official. Rick Scott, senator from Florida. Paul Ryan, former Speaker of the House, former 2012 Republican presidential nominee, not former, actual 2012 Republican presidential nominee, former representative from Wisconsin's 1st District. Paul Ryan, senator from Kentucky. Sean Hannity, Fox News commentator, actually news host. Marco Rubio, senator from Florida. Ted Cruz, senator from Texas. Tom Cotton, senator from Arkansas. Tucker Carlson, Fox News host. John Kasich, former governor of Alaska. Holy crap. I got that one smack wrong. Ohio's right behind him. I don't know why I said that. Sorry about that. Former governor of Ohio. Christy Gnome, current governor of South Dakota. And then we have Tim Scott, the senator of South Carolina, one of them, the other being Lindsey Graham. So all of these candidates, so many, as you can see so far. We're talking about a very extensive list here, which I think is very, very interesting. When you're looking at the amount of candidates that could potentially run, it could actually outdo what we saw happen in 2016. Let's go ahead and look back to see how many candidates actually ran back then, and many of these are repeat names. Now, if you look at the polling list, it gets a lot worse for the GOP when you're looking at the sheer amount of number of candidates. It's very, very interesting, to say the least, just looking at the amount of people who ran, very similar to the 2020 presidential nomination for the Democrats. In fact, less candidates, but still a very extensive list here and a lot of repeat names. Kasich is a repeat. Marco Rubio is a repeat. Ted Cruz is a repeat. Rand Paul is a repeat. Let's keep looking. Chris Christie, a repeat. Let's see if we can find any here. I don't think any of the rest actually ran for president back then. But the main point is that, the 2024 Republican presidential primary will be a very important one. And I think that the Republican Party currently has a lot of people that could potentially be running. And I'm only going to be working within the list of those here. I'm not going to talk about Matt Gaetz, especially now. I'm not going to talk about Candace Owens. Let's get started right into this list. So we'll work from left to right and start ranking our candidates that way. We're going to try to go through them pretty fast. Quick reasoning, if you have any questions or if you have any moments of contention or disagreements with me, I would love to see that in the comments because, of course, I know this won't be 100% accurate. Obviously, it's my own personal opinion. This is one of the opinion videos where I just think, how will this candidate actually do in the general election? So let's get through it. So Ben Sasse from Nebraska. First of all, I'm not hopeful about his primary ambitions. He's been vehemently opposed to President Trump, one of the most outspoken critics within the Republican Party. I don't think this really means much, and he also doesn't offer much of an electoral advantage. I think that Ben Sasse is in a sense boring. He's a traditional type of Republican. Obviously a conservative. I think that's just the generic type of Republican that you would expect from the GOP. Let's go with the C rating. Then we have Charlie Baker from the state of Massachusetts. Now, everyone overhypes the outreach ability of these Republican governors from Democratic states. No, Massachusetts is not going red on the presidential level, even if Charlie Baker is the nominee. Things have changed. We are no longer as willing to cross over in terms of our support, especially on the presidential level. I think Charlie Baker would have a very difficult time in the primary, but that's not the main focus. I think that he could offer, sure, that liberal Republican type of mentality, more centrist and more obviously not a liberal at all, still a conservative. All of these Republicans are Republicans at heart. Yes, that includes Larry Hogan. Sure, maybe labeled as a rhino, but I think would, maybe offer a little bit more appeal to Democrats and independents, but I don't think they would be the strongest out of them all. I think that they are completely overhyped in terms of those who think that they would be 100%, the best candidates. Chris Christie, I'm not even really going to discuss much there. I think he's a failed candidate. I think that he's not going to be strong. Couldn't even get himself into the Trump administration. I really don't think that he has much of a future, presidentially speaking, unless something dramatically changes. He rode the wave of Hurricane Sandy, and I think that, that was ultimately what put him in such a high approval rating for a very brief period of time, completely tanked leading up to the 2017 governor election. I don't have much hope for him moving forward, but could end up in the administrations of a Republican president in the future. Dan Crenshaw, I think, is way too outspoken for his own good. He's not Donald Trump. He tries to replicate Donald Trump. He tries to do everything that he can. He tries to not be politically correct. The only crowd he's inspiring is one from Turning Point USA. I don't think that Dan Crenshaw is necessarily a strong candidate at all. Even his ads come across as someone who is trying to be this action-packed representative. And at the end of the day, first of all, look at his district. Very gerrymandered. He's not winning in a swing district. Number two, while he does offer the advantage in Texas, which went to Donald Trump by just 5.6%, I'm not going to sit here and say Dan Crenshaw really offers any other type of electoral advantage than winning in already a red state. I'm going to keep him in the F slot. Donald Trump Jr., how do you think he would go? Well, first of all, I think that he would have a pretty good primary experience. If Trump doesn't decide to run, of course they're going to choose the next Donald Trump. I think that he could certainly win over a lot of those Trump voters that were previously Obama voters and keep many of them in the column. I'm going to put him in the B column. I think that he could retain a lot of Trump support. I don't think enough to actually win the election. I'm not hopeful for him. I think that those who could actually win elections are in the A and S tier. But I would say, he might be one of the better performing Republicans just because of his name, plainly put. Donald Trump, I'm going to leave him for near the end. I don't want to talk about him too quick. I understand you might be upset that I don't want to talk about him right now, but I think he definitely needs a little bit more time than the rest of these. Eric Trump, I'm going to put him in the C. I think that Donald Trump Jr., just having the Donald Trump name, I promise you, the American electorate is easy to estimate, easy to understand, at least on a surface level basis. Donald Trump Jr. is going to do better in a primary and a general election than Eric Trump. I think that looking at the what's going to happen here is that, first of all, Eric Trump, I think, is less enthusiastic, number one. I think he comes across as the, not to be rude or try to insult his intelligence level, but comes across as the less intelligent son. But, Eric Trump, I'm just going to go ahead and put in the C column right now. I don't find much inspiring about him at all, whereas Donald Trump Jr. at least has some type of charisma, I think. Donald Trump, again, we're going to avoid him. Let's move him down here so I don't accidentally say his name again. Ron DeSantis, I think he could be surprisingly a strong candidate. While he may be bashed in terms of the way that he handled COVID-19 in the state of Florida, it seems as if the constituents seem to like him. He's up double digits in polling data against the Democrats, and his approval rating isn't exactly dipping as much as it should be, at least in a traditional swing state. There are plenty of Democrats and independents who still like what Ron DeSantis is doing, and even at some point he had 65 points in terms of an approval. I would say Ron DeSantis might be in a good pathway and could offer certainly a huge bump in the state of Florida, given his current popularity. I'm going to put him in the A. After what happened down in Texas, I'm going to go ahead and put Greg Abbott in the F. I really think that if he was, it looks as if he is running in Texas again in 2022. I think it'll be interesting. I think he will be in for the closest race. Looking at the entire debacle that happened down in Texas very recently. I think that will be something that really haunts him. Obviously, I don't think that Texas is going to go blue on the presidential level, especially with him as the nominee, but I don't think that he is going to be all of a sudden this godsend of a candidate, a Republican from a Republican state. Really, there's not much to offer. So let's move on. I don't think Greg Abbott is individually a strong candidate. He is going to remain in the F tier. Ivanka Trump, I think she could be a surprisingly strong candidate. I'm going to put her in the B column as well. I think she's very well spoken. I think she has a very clear mindset of what she wants to do. I honestly think Ivanka Trump is going to go for the presidency in one way or another. And I think looking at 2024 may not be her year, but I think if she is the one and they clear the field for her, I think she could perform on par with Charlie Baker and Donald Trump Jr. I don't think she would win. I think she would perform on par. Here we have Josh Hawley from the state of Missouri. At the end of the day, first of all, his constituents don't like him. He's not liked by his constituents. He's not liked by the American people. He's accused of inciting an insurrection. He's being blamed for almost everything Donald Trump did, at least for the January 6th riots, except he doesn't have the unwavering base. Republicans have turned against him in his own state. He practically doesn't even live in his own home state. I don't think Josh Hawley is a strong candidate at all. I think he would perform worse than Eric Trump, but better than Chris Christie or Dan Crenshaw, but that's not saying much. All of these candidates are losing candidates, at least in this tier or below. Larry Hogan, I'm going to put him up with Charlie Baker for the exact same reason. I really think that, liberal Republicans, or at least moderate Republicans, no Republicans right now, statewide speaking, maybe Phil Scott, other than that, are really liberal per se. I think that they are just more moderate and therefore, are accused of being liberal, but I don't think that they are liberal. I think Larry Hogan is still conservative at heart, holds many conservative beliefs, still a Republican, but looking at the outreach that I think he could have. Don't think he would do well in the primary, but I think he could do moderately well in a general election, win over some regions that, otherwise wouldn't be winnable. Now, Mike Pence, I have, labeled him as this boring version of President Trump, obviously, even sometimes even more right-wing than President Trump in terms of personal beliefs. I'm going to put Mike Pence in the A tier. I think that he has a winning shot at the presidency, as many people reported back when he had a debate against Kamala Harris, senator at the time, vice president now, of course. He came across as someone who could return a sense of normalcy to conservatism, and someone who could return the idea that conservative values are the foundational values of the American public, and that they are the ones that should be voted for and voted in. I think Mike Pence, with the right campaign style and with the right vice presidential candidate, could land himself in the presidency in the immediate future, meaning 2024. Mike Pompeo, I really don't see much. I don't see much of an appeal for him. I'm going to go ahead and say, C, maybe D. Let's go ahead and say C. I don't think that he's going to be. Obviously, he will be closely tied to the Trump administration. He even, encouraged, or not necessarily, yes, I'm going to say encouraged the baseless claims of election fraud, discussing the transition and, everything with Mike Pompeo. I think he just has a guilty by association thing with President Trump, and he's not necessarily too inspiring. I don't think, any of these C-tier candidates could really go out to a crowd and fire them up. Mitt Romney, I think, while a strong candidate in the past, in 2012, potentially in 2016, I think a lot of that has fizzled out. His approval rating is higher amongst Democrats than it is Republicans nationwide. In the state of Utah, he's not exactly someone who's adored as he used to be. I think he will slide to re-election, mainly because he does provide a lot of Mormon representation for the state. But just looking at Mitt Romney, I think that he wouldn't be someone who could win a presidential election. He would have a very difficult time corralling that Republican base. But if he gets it, I still think that he will fall short. I don't think Mitt Romney has the presidency lined up in his future. Now, Nikki Haley is very interesting. I think Nikki Haley could provide an S-tier quality type candidate. And I know some of you guys might disagree with me there, but I think Nikki Haley is someone who has played for both sides in the sense that she has criticized Trump and worked for him, gained his praise, got his nomination, and then went ahead and said, while she still supports President Trump, does also have some type of misgivings about the former president. And I think that Nikki Haley really could be the first woman president. And I think that she will absolutely be running in 2024, and I think it'll be very interesting to say the least. I think Nikki Haley really has a good shot. I don't think she will do super well in the primary. Early polling data is indicating that she's around 6-7%, but we all know things can very much change. Things can absolutely change within the first, few weeks or few months of a primary season. So Nikki Haley, I think, is amongst one of the strongest candidates the Republican Party could nominate in 2024. She speaks very well. She has a very good tone to her voice. She has a sense of normalcy coming with her. She's a traditional type Republican, comes from South Carolina, not necessarily an electoral advantage, but I think she really would be able to win back suburban women and offer a more, I'm not going to say that word, I'm going to say more focused Sarah Palin, a more educated Sarah Palin on the issues. And I think that Nikki Haley certainly will be a pretty strong candidate on that on its own. Rick Scott, I'm going to go ahead and say around B, even though he is from Florida, and I think that Florida is certainly a state that the Republican Party is going to want at least a presidential or vice presidential candidate from. I think that he's not going to do enough in order to win, and he only narrowly won back in 2018. Yes, it was a blue wave year, but Florida, keep in mind, is very inelastic to wave years. He narrowly won in a red wave year. So I'm not going to say that, Rick Scott is all of a sudden this electoral giant because he was able to defeat a Democrat in a blue wave year. He almost lost in a red wave year. So at the end of the day, close elections all around. I'm going to say B tier for right now. Paul Ryan, very similar to Mitt Romney. I think that, many of these candidates are strong in a sense. They could potentially do well, but in most cases will fall short. And I think that's the case with Paul Ryan. Paul Ryan, also a very good speaker, very well spoken, someone who can return, the American public to a sense of normalcy within the GOP, but I don't think he will be able to corral Republicans the way that someone so closely tied to President Trump or someone who's truly inspirational and charismatic really can. And while Paul Ryan, I think, does have the energy, I don't think the presidency is something that would be lined up for him in the future. And he didn't offer much of a help in the Rust Belt back in 2012. So I think it'll be interesting to see what would happen if he was the actual nominee. But for right now, I'm going to say B. Rand Paul in the state of Kentucky. Really, I think that he has taken a very big shift to the right compared to his previous more libertarian, more not necessarily centrist, but more socially left, but economically right. I know that's cringy to say and cringy to hear, but realistically speaking, I think Rand Paul was definitely more left wing. Isn't saying much. It's not saying much. Don't get me wrong. But I think he was definitely more left wing in the past, but not now. I think he's definitely taken a big turn to the right, and I think that I really think that he's not someone who would be too strong. I think he was loved back in 2016, floated as a top name among straw polls and the media and all of these Republican donors, but I don't think that he's someone who would be flaunted as even a potentially strong pick in 2024. Then we have Sean Hannity. I'm going to immediately put in the F tier. Yes, Donald Trump was a real estate mogul, someone who was a part of a reality TV show and became president of the United States. What's saying Sean Hannity can't? Well, while Sean Hannity does have that grip on the Fox News voters, I don't think he offers much to the American public. Donald Trump was a businessman. Sean Hannity is a host of a Fox News show, which is disliked by many members of the centrist wing of this entire country, many independents. Plenty of Republicans don't like Fox News. They think that it's too far to the right. I don't think that really offers him much help, much of a boost outside of the Republican primary. I'm going to go ahead and say, for at least right now, Sean Hannity is in the F. Marco Rubio. I'm surprised I didn't see him before. I thought I saw him earlier. Marco Rubio is certainly interesting. I think that he's not Rick Scott, but he's also not Ron DeSantis. So I'm debating on whether or not I would put him in A or B. I think Marco Rubio will have trouble in a Republican primary, but I also think that he could offer some support, especially amongst Latino voters, that has been untapped in the Republican Party for quite some time now, that could land them victories in states such as Nevada and, bring back Colorado and New Mexico to being competitive, lock down Florida. I think a lot of this will be dependent on his 2022 margin of victory, assuming he wins. It looks like all signs are saying he will win. So for right now, I'm going to put Marco Rubio in the A tier. I think he's a winnable GOP candidate. Ted Cruz, I think he's one of the worst now. Before I said, I thought that he was an electable candidate in 2016, potentially in 2024, depending on his relationship with President Trump. But at the end of the day, Ted Cruz is someone who has become a kiss-up to President Trump, did a full 180. And while that would help him in a primary, I don't think Ted Cruz even would be liked amongst the public for a general election. In fact, he's disliked by around 10 points more than Donald Trump. So Ted Cruz, not much of a political future for him on the presidential level, could potentially even lose his Senate seat in 2024. Now we have Tom Cotton from the state of Arkansas. I think he's one of the more right-wing candidates on this entire list. He doesn't offer any type of centrist ideals, any type of appeal to independence. I'm going to immediately say F tier. I don't have really much hope for him at all. Now, Tucker Carlson, I think because of how outspoken he is and how much he does get around to different media sources, he could inspire rural voters or, voters that traditionally don't vote, that voted in 2020 or 2016. Potentially, I don't think he would have the same type of I think he would have more of an effect than Sean Hannity. But I've seen a lot of these people talking about Tucker Carlson 2024. Tucker Carlson would be a winnable GOP candidate. At the end of the day, I personally am not seeing it. I don't think that's true. I really don't think that's true. Here we have John Kasich, the former governor from Ohio. Now, the thing that I would see being very difficult for him is, number one, that he endorsed Joe Biden in the 2020 presidential election. John Kasich spoke at the Democratic National Committee convention back in 2020. I think, John Kasich is certainly an interesting pick here for nomination. I think that he would be around the C just because I don't think he would be able to really rile up any base within the GOP. He'd be about even. I think that he would just perform poorly because there would be no energy behind him. And yes, he may have endorsed Biden, but that doesn't ensure crossover support. It does show some type of deal bipartisanship, but I'm not going to say here that John Kasich is the, the one person who could win over Democratic voters. Yes, it may show bipartisanship, but Democratic voters are still Democratic voters, and just one endorsement isn't enough to counteract whatever Democratic nominee the Democrats put up in 2024. Christy Gnome, I think that some people think that she is pretty strong as a potential candidate, but keep in mind she hasn't spent much of her time outside of her own, inside of her own home state of South Dakota, been hit very, very hard with COVID-19, and while she would be praised, I think, for being very similar to Hillary Clinton or Carly Fiorina, I think that she doesn't offer the same type of appeal as Nikki Haley, and I think that Christy Gnome will certainly be bashed for the way that she handled COVID-19 in South Dakota, because it's one of the most hard-hit states in the entire country. I'm going to put her around B just because I think she will get a lot of media coverage and a lot of support, but I don't think that she would be doing enough in order to win on the presidential level. She's smart, but I don't think she would be amongst the group of, Mike Pence or Nikki Haley. Looking at the final list here, we have two people. We have Tim Scott from the state of South Carolina. He was first elected, I think, back in 2014, I believe, in a special election, because he's up in 2022. So he must have been up in a special election and then up in 2016 and then 2022. But looking at his record, I think that he is one of the few Republicans. First of all, he's the only black male Republican senator in the United States Senate. So let's keep that clear. He's the only black male Republican senator. So he was also the first. And, not the first. I think the first from the state of South Carolina. But just looking at Tim Scott here, I don't think he would offer much to the Republican Party. I think there will be some potential crossover support from minority voters, but at the end of the day, I really don't think it's going to be super monumental. I think it's more of an easier base to tap into amongst Latino voters or Asian voters than it is amongst black voters, just simply because of how lopsided the vote margins are amongst the black community versus the Hispanic community or the Asian community. Black voters are the most solid Democratic base out of any group of people of color, and I think that it will be very hard to tap into versus Latino voters, which have actually historically backed the Republican Party. And then the final candidate on here is Donald Trump, and I am going to put him in the S tier. Yes, I think it's possible that he loses, but I think it's likelier that Trump would win a general election than it is for Paul Ryan or Christy Gnome or Ivanka Trump or Ben Sasse or Josh Hawley or Chris Christie. I think that Donald Trump, while someone who would obviously, I think, has the possibility of losing, has a very good way of spinning the media, of spinning the truth, and solidifying that Trump support. Because most of the Republican Party wants Trump to be the nominee in 2024, which also ensures that down ballot races will be impacted by Trump. We won't be able to poll the race correctly, and rural voters might turn out at a very similar rate, whereas they otherwise would not, had it been with any other type of candidate on this list. So looking at Donald Trump, while someone who I think could absolutely lose, I'm going to put in the S tier because I think he's the one that has the largest chance of winning as it stands today, just because of his so solid Republican base and the ability to change the news cycle for the next 3 years, even without social media, even without the Oval Office. So thank you guys so much for watching this video. Make sure to comment down suggestions below. Subscribe on the left if you haven't already, and check out the Instagram and Twitter. At the bottom left of the screen, there's also a Discord server for you to go ahead and join. On the screen, there's a video you can watch, and then a playlist for my 2024 presidential election analysis videos. Again, thank you guys so much for watching, and I will see you all tomorrow.